Hey everyone, welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today on something pretty interesting, a social movement that's been making headlines.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Our source material is an article from the Times of India.
Okay.
And trust me, the headline alone is going to make
Hmm.
you raise an eyebrow.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just get right to it. The headline reads, "No sex, no marriage. Women protest Trump's win by boycotting relationships with men."
Wow.
I mean, that's a pretty bold statement right there.
Yeah, and that's really interesting is the date of the article, November 9th, 2024.
Oh, wow.
So this is a very recent development. It's very likely tied directly to the U.S. election results.
So basically a movement that's unfolding in real time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so diving into the details, the article explains that some American women are participating in what they're calling a sex strike.
Okay.
It's essentially a boycott of relationships with men as a way to express their dissatisfaction with Donald Trump's presidential win.
Interesting.
And,
Now, the article does point out that this movement is actually inspired by something called the 4B movement from South Korea.
hmm,
And it's not just about abstaining from sex, it's about abstaining from dating marriage and even having children.
wow.
It really makes you wonder why American women are choosing to adopt a movement that originated in a completely different culture.
Right. What does that tell us about what's going on in America
I
right
know
now,
so shut.
socially and politically?
Yeah.
The article even quotes a woman saying, "For the next 4 years, I am going to abstain from sex with men." I mean, talk about putting your beliefs into action.
Yeah, and this 4B name is pretty clever.
Yeah.
It comes from the Korean word for no, and it encapsulates the four areas of boycott, dating, sex, marriage, and childbirth.
It's a complete rejection of traditional expectations.
Absolutely.
And it's not just a fringe idea. The article talks about how social media is buzzing with women discussing this movement.
Wow.
Can you imagine the conversations that are happening online right now?
Yeah, I can only imagine.
So the article highlights two key reasons behind this movement's sudden surge in popularity in America.
Okay.
The first one is unsurprisingly concern over women's reproductive rights, especially in light of the ongoing debates surrounding access to abortion.
Right.
There's a really powerful quote from the article that says, "If all these men are voting to take our rights away, they don't deserve to touch a woman for the next 4 years." So hope you thought that through, you guys.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
You can really feel the frustration and the anger fueling this movement.
Absolutely. And the second reason the article brings up is the perceived increase in young male Republican voters, which seems to be adding another layer of anxiety to the situation.
Right, so we have a movement that's using relationships and intimacy as a form of protest,
Yeah.
which leads to a really interesting question. How effective can a tactic like this actually be?
That is a fascinating question. I mean, historically, movements that disrupt social norms have often been effective in drawing attention to issues and prompting change. Think about the civil rights movement and the impact of boycotts and sit-ins.
Right.
This sex strike, while certainly unconventional, taps into that same idea of leveraging personal choices to make a powerful statement.
And there's another interesting angle that the article touches upon, the idea of women deleting their dating apps as part of this protest. It's almost like a digital detox,
Yeah.
a way to reclaim their time and
So
attention
that's a good point.
from a system that they feel is failing them.
That digital aspect really adds a whole other dimension to this movement, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It reflects the reality of how relationships are formed and nurtured in today's world.
It's true.
By stepping away from these dating apps, they're disrupting one of the main avenues of social interaction today.
Right.
It's a symbolic act with real-world consequences.
Yeah, it's important to remember that this 4B movement didn't just appear out of thin air.
Right.
The article traces its origins back to South Korea, where it emerged as a response to things like hidden camera crimes and societal pressures that women were facing.
And what I find really intriguing is how a movement born out of very specific concerns in one country is now being embraced and adapted in a totally different context.
Yeah.
It highlights how fluid ideas can be and how movements can transcend borders,
Yeah.
finding resonance in different cultures and political climate.
Right. It begs the question, what does this adoption of the 4B movement say about the shared experiences of women across the globe?
Yeah, are there some underlying frustrations and anxieties that resonate with women regardless of where they live?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it really makes you think,
It does.
are we witnessing a global shift where women are pushing back against traditional expectations,
Yeah,
societal pressures?
that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
But let's take a step back for a moment.
Okay.
What if this movement actually gains momentum? What would be the consequences, both positive and negative?
Yeah. Could this be a catalyst for real change?
Right.
Or could it backfire and further divide people?
It's definitely a possibility.
And since the article is focusing on the U.S., do you think we could see similar movements popping up in other parts of the world?
I wouldn't rule it out. If this movement gains enough traction and visibility in the U.S.,
Hmm.
it could definitely inspire similar actions in other countries, especially in places where women are facing similar challenges
Yeah.
when it comes to reproductive rights, gender equality, political
It's not
representation.
like a ripple effect.
Exactly. One action can inspire a wave of others.
It's like this article is a snapshot of something much bigger,
Yeah.
a glimpse into the power of social movements
Absolutely.
and how they can evolve and spread.
In ways we might not even anticipate.
Exactly. And what I find so compelling about this particular movement is that it really highlights how social change often starts with individual choices and actions.
Right.
These women are choosing to use their personal lives as a form of protest,
Yeah, and that in itself is incredibly powerful.
regardless of whether or not this specific movement achieves its goals. It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the dynamics between genders and the challenges that women continue to face.
Absolutely.
It makes me think about that whole concept of voting with your wallet, but applied to relationships.
Okay.
It's like they're saying, we have the power to choose who we engage with,
Uh-huh.
and we're using that power to make a statement.
It's almost like a modern-day Lysistrata,
Mm.
a play written centuries ago where women withhold sex to try and end a war.
Oh, wow.
It just goes to show that some ideas, some forms of protest are timeless in their essence.
And while the effectiveness of this tactic remains to be seen, one thing's for sure, this movement is generating a lot of conversation
Yeah, it is.
and challenging deeply ingrained assumptions about power and gender roles.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most fascinating aspects of this is how it blurs the lines between personal choices and political action.
Yeah.
It raises questions about what constitutes a valid form of protest in the modern world, and how individuals can leverage their personal lives to advocate for social change.
It's a really complex issue with no easy answers.
It is.
But that's what makes it so intriguing, right? It's a
Yeah.
story that's still unfolding.
Absolutely.
And it'll be fascinating to see where it goes from here. Do you think this will gain even more momentum,
Well, it's hard to predict.
or will it fade away?
I think a lot will depend on how the media portrays this movement
Mm.
and whether it resonates with a broader audience.
Oh.
Social movements often need a certain level of visibility and public support to really affect change,
Yeah.
but it also needs to maintain its focus
Right.
and avoid getting diluted or sidetracked
Right.
by competing agendas.
I agree. And on that note, I'd like to bring our listener into the conversation.
Okay.
This is a movement driven by individual choices.
Right.
So we want to hear your thoughts. What are your initial reactions to this 4B movement? Do you think it has the potential to make a real impact? Share your insights with us on our social media channels. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about the 4B movement, its origins in South Korea, and how it's being adopted in the U.S.
Yeah.
as a way to protest political outcomes and kind of address these anxieties
Yeah, anxieties about the future.
that seem to be bubbling up right now.
What I find so interesting is how this movement is using something as personal as relationships,
Right.
as a tool for social commentary.
It really challenges our traditional notions of protest.
It does.
It makes us rethink how individuals can actually exert their influence.
Yeah, in a world that's constantly changing.
Right. It's almost like they're taking the phrase, our bodies, our choice, to a whole new level.
Yeah.
It's not just about reproductive rights anymore. It's about taking control over every aspect of their lives.
Right.
Including who they choose to be intimate with. So that brings us to a very important question. How effective can a strategy like this actually be?
Right. Can withholding intimacy really sway political opinions?
Right. Or create lasting social change?
That's a big question, isn't it? It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But what it definitely does is spark a conversation
Right.
and forces us to challenge these assumptions about gender roles, power dynamics,
Yeah.
and how personal choices can become political acts.
It reminds us that sometimes the most personal choices can have the most profound effects on the world around us.
Absolutely. And, it makes you wonder, could this be a sign of things to come? Could we see similar movements emerge?
Right. In response to other political or social events in the future.
Yeah. And, we've seen how an idea that originated in South Korea
Right.
has resonated with women in the U.S.,
Right.
adapting to a different cultural context, but still addressing similar concerns.
Makes you wonder what other innovative forms of protest might emerge as individuals continue to find new ways to make their voices heard.
Yeah, and that I believe is the key takeaway for you, our listener.
Right.
We've delved deep into the 4B movement, its origins, its evolution,
All the questions that it raised.
about social change in the 21st century. But the real deep dive starts now in your own mind.
Mm.
As you reflect on what we've discussed today, we encourage you to consider, could this movement gain wider traction? What are the potential implications, both positive and negative, if it does? And perhaps most importantly, what does this movement tell us about the evolving relationship between personal choices and political action in our increasingly interconnected world?
It's definitely a lot to think about.
It
And
is.
it'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone.